What's up, guys? What is up? Welcome to another episode of Deck Talk Podcast. And we've been waiting on this one because we've been wanting to get a marine biologist out on the podcast with us. And we have got one today that is pretty well known in the industry. And but guys, before we get going, we do have some business to take care of. This episode is brought to you by Bruiser Baits, Firefly Marines, Joe Burns Outdoors, YOLO Tech, Spear Point Hooks, Pro Line Baits, and Cornfield Fishing Gear. Guys, make sure you go check them out and use the discount code DECKTALK10 and get your product. You will not be disappointed in any of that product. But while we got it going, we have what is it? I'm trying to think what was it? Pro Lake Management, Stephen Bardin. What do you know, brother? Thank you for coming on, man.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. Yeah, I own two companies, Pro Lake Management and Black Bass Stewardship Group. Pro Lake Management, we do is manage private lakes, primarily throughout the southern U.S. Based out of Texas. So it's hot and dry here, but we're loving it. And then Black Bass Stewardship Group is a company that I have a business partner, Gary Klein. You guys may have heard of that legendary.
Maybe once or twice.
Yeah, he and I started a company back in 2020, and it's called Black Bass Stewardship Group. And what we do is we help companies, brands, industry partners find their conservation message and execute. And a lot of people know me because of our work with Major League Fishing as the head of their fisheries management division. We also work with companies like Kubota, work with the Arkansas Fish and Game Foundation, Mossback Fish Habitat, guys like Cliff Crochet and his Every Fish Matters campaign. Right. So we get to work with a lot of cool groups executing projects across the U.S. in our public reservoirs.
Man, and that's
awesome.
That is amazing. And the one thing, like when we were trying to find a biologist to be able to come on, and we had what was it? I had a good buddy of mine, Alex Rudd, and yep. I just drew Caleb. And Caleb talked about Caleb Bell. And then what's the guy's name for Serious Angler Podcast? Bailey, yeah. And so all three of them had mentioned you, so we're like, and I remember seeing you on Bailey's podcast,
right?
And and Bailey gave me your contact to be able to reach out to you, and because we've been wanting to know some stuff, like ask questions, because I mean, about the TVA lakes and stuff like that as well. I know that you're stationed in like home quarters and stuff is there in Texas, but like Chickamauga, Guntersville, right, and all that, and so we had some questions and stuff that we wanted to ask you. But first off, we want to kind of get to know where our viewers get to kind of know you. So what does like your job entail with being able to like help manage lakes and people's private ponds and stuff like that as well, correct?
Yeah, we could start with Pro Lake Management. So what we do is we develop lake management plans for private landowners. So you've got a pond, you got a lake. We actually manage water bodies anywhere from 1/8 of a surface acre all the way up to 2,500 surface acres in our client list. So we manage all size water bodies. Primarily, we do trophy black bass management, specifically focused on Florida bass, trying to kind of use whatever the surface area of the pond is, maximize its carrying capacity, and give a result on big largemouth bass. Sometimes we work on species like crappie or sunfish, copper-nosed bluegill. We do a lot of trophy bluegill. And every once in a while, we get to do a fun project like smallmouth bass. For private lake management, there's 5 main keys. You got to have the right genetics of fish. You got to have the right forage. You got to reduce the number of competitors via harvest. You got to have good water quality, and you got to have good habitat. So we function in those 5 areas. We do a lot of electrofishing. My staff of biologists, they actually do a lot of just traditional fishing to capture fish, depending on what time of year it is. If the electrofishing is not really conducive, electrofishing works whenever the water temperature allows the fish to be shallower than 8 foot. Whenever the majority of fish move offshore, whether that's winter or summer, traditional fishing, we can outfish electrofishing boat most days. So we collect a lot of fish samples. We get links and weights off of every one of those fish, compare them to standard weights, look at what are they eating, how fast are they growing, and really just try to create an outline of how do you maximize your pond. A lot of that has to do with controlling vegetation or color, clarity. Once again, harvest is a big key. So how many pounds per acre are you pulling out? So on the Pro Lake side, it's fairly streamlined, and those things are universal across the country. There's some differences in water quality. There's some differences in water temperature, which dictates how fast fish grow or what species and genetic type you can use. But anybody from across the country could call our office and ask me a question, and I can answer it. Or because it's a close knit industry, I know the other biologists and the rest of the country. So if I can't answer it, I just pass it on to one of my colleagues at a different company up north or wherever it might be, hand it off to them. On the reservoir management or the fisheries management side and public reservoirs are managed in conjunction. So you have your state agency, they manage the fish. So for me, it's Texas Parks and Wildlife, they're managing the fish. For the TVA, you're either with the Tennessee Resource Agency or you're in Alabama. One of those two really is what you're focused on. So those are going to manage your fish. Now, TVA is owned, and all water systems are owned by somebody. TVA is of course owned by the River Authority, and so they dictate things like habitat, water level, flow. So your agency might go and they may electrofish in the same way that I do. They collect data the same way I do on a public. They do it on a public body of water. I do it on private. They collect that data the exact same way. They assess it the exact same way. Then they make recommendations that the TVA typically just accepts whenever it comes to the fish. But if it came to some of those other parts where we're talking about habitat, water color, clarity, nutrient, those things, then the river authority are going to have more control. Now, if we're off of a TVA system, that may be an electric company, that may be a city, that may be Corps of Engineers. So there's always these conflicting groups that control certain aspects of a public body of water. So for those, I do a lot of consulting work because I travel with Major League Fishing. I communicate with the state agencies. We talk about some of the same issues. We go to the same conferences, American Fisheries Society, division conferences, state conferences. We're having our Black Bass 2025 conference next week. All the agencies will provide their black bass biologists for that meeting. So we do collaborate a lot, which allows me to provide my opinion on many public bodies of water, but I don't always get to make my opinion what is actually going to be factual and happen. But at least I get to state it. I do get to collaborate with them a lot on habitat projects. I've done 2 projects on Chickamauga. Never did a project on Gunnersville, although I've done like Duck River Reservoir. I've done projects on Logan Martin. So I do get to the state of Alabama, but never got to actually do something on Gunnersville. But yeah, I've been on the lake several times, so we can chat about it.
So what are some of the challenges facing fishing populations that you guys face?
No, that's great. So it is, you're going to hate a lot of these answers because every freshwater fishery, the system is slightly different. And so there's no universal challenge, but I will go on kind of a short soapbox if your audience will have me for a second.
Yeah.
Across the U.S., reservoirs were built primarily at the same time between 1950 and 1970. That's when the majority of our reservoirs were built, height of reservoir construction. At the time that a reservoir is built, the dam impounds water in an unnatural way. That river system still brings in all of the things that it naturally would have if it was a river. So every bit of nutrient, every bit of silt, everything that's coming from the watershed is still coming down. But now a dam slows that water movement down and lets things accumulate in a reservoir. So think about every reservoir being built between the 50s and the 70s primarily. There's a few outliers. We actually build reservoirs slower today than we did in 1890. So we have very few coming online today. This means that all reservoirs are aging at basically the same rate across the country. So there are a few universal things that are happening with our reservoirs. Number one, all standing timber is degrading. And as it degrades, it falls. That degradation can be sped up or slowed down depending on if it's a constant pool reservoir or if it fluctuates, has an annual drawdown. That will change that a little bit. But we're losing our woody debris, our woody timber. We're also accumulating silt in sediment. That is a natural process when a reservoir or pond is built. You're going to accumulate silt. That silt likely carries a nutrient load. So for the most part, our reservoirs are becoming nutrient rich, specifically with phosphorus, and that leads to a type of algae. We call it cyanobacteria, but it's also blue-green algae. Same name or two different names for the same thing. But universally, we have aging reservoirs that are losing their hard habitat, they're gaining silt, and they're getting more frequent harmful algal blooms like cyanobacteria. So those three things are happening, and that's just the process of reservoir aging. They're not all great fisheries across this country are reservoirs, of course. So some bodies of water are immune to maybe the loss of hard habitat or maybe the loss or accumulation of silt, but they're all collecting nutrient because of how we use our watersheds. And we see these cyano blooms from the Great Lakes to Okeechobee, and now we're seeing them in our reservoirs. So those three things are fairly universal, which means that across the country, if we're just saying what is the first thing we could approach as anglers, we can approach loss of habitat. And that's obvious with what we do with Major League Fishing. That's one of the areas we focus on is we get our anglers out and we put habitat in. We select PVC or plastic habitat because it has a longer longevity in the water. It doesn't have a process by which it should mechanically break down, and it doesn't really chemically break down. So it's stable. Unless something happens to where it's placed in the wrong location or we have excessive drawdowns or something like that, it's not exposed to the elements of the atmosphere. It's kind of contained in the water. So that is, in my opinion, and most of the anglers that I deal with on the Major League Fishing side agree that is better longevity than we get from brush piles. Now, of course, there's a cost associated with artificial habitat versus brush piles, but approaching habitat loss is a great place to start for anglers. If we're going to go like non-universal, if we're going to like start picking out some areas, you've got issues like largemouth bass virus that come and goes out of fisheries. We can chat about that a little bit. We have issues where in the 70s, we really started this catch and release movement, popularized by Ray Scott and Bassmaster, and it has really saved bass fishing. Catch and release has, but we've taken it maybe to the extreme at this point to where many people believe that you shouldn't harvest bass at all, which is really starting to show some impacts on our fisheries where we have undersized fish and we have slow growth. And really our fisheries just aren't being maximized. And you're seeing state agencies like Florida and Oklahoma changing regulation so that people are allowed to harvest more fish, trying to promote the harvest of bass. So harvest bass, that is one of the biggest topics that we'll have next week of Black Bass 2025. We'll talk about how do we promote the harvest of bass correctly. And I'm not talking about 5 to 8 to 10 pound fish. I'm talking about 10 to 14 inch fish. How do we remove the system and improve our fisheries? And then another, maybe not non-universal, but a good conflict that often gets discussed is genetics of fish. I don't know how much you guys are into the science, but over the last 18 months, the American Fisheries Society, which is kind of the governing body of scientific names of fish and what determines what is and is not a species, decided that largemouth bass and Florida bass are two unique species. And
Right.
because of that, that changed the IGFA world record and made both Manabu Kurita's fish and George Perry's fish the actual largemouth bass record and vacated the Florida bass record, which allowed Texas to submit a fish by an angler, Kyle Hall, and caught it OHIV, a 16-pound fish that became our world record until myself, Josh Sackmar from Red Hills Fish Hatchery, and Brandon Booth from the state of Florida, until we went and did a genetic sample of Manabu Kurita's fish the last year. That fish, actually, the skin mount of that fish was at the Yamaha facility in Georgia, and we collected one of the pectoral fins and did genetic analysis and found out that fish was a 99% Florida. So now IGFA recognizes that as our Florida world record, and George Perry's fish as our largemouth bass world record. So it's really confusing.
Yeah.
So we have that. We also have the fact that you, as an angler, can't honestly tell the difference of a pure Florida fish versus a fish that has a slight Florida genetic. There's no physical indicator, which means that across the country, when Florida bass are introduced, we don't know if you're catching a Florida or a largemouth bass. We have the same problem when it comes to spotted bass versus Alabama bass. Those are two unique species, and we saw the California spotted bass record. It turns out that was an Alabama bass. So the world record spotted bass is reverted back, and that's now the Alabama bass record. So there's a lot of like little nuanced things with the black bass species that we can chat about as well.
Yeah. So how did the spotted bass, Alabama bass, wind up in California?
That's a great question. So before spotted bass and Alabama bass were two different species. We called Kentucky spotted bass, and we called Alabama bass spotted bass.
Right.
And the fish that were in the Coosa River were moved out of the Coosa River and transported and stocked in the state of California. And at the time, we thought those were spotted bass. Now, all black bass, and black bass includes, anything that's like a largemouth, smallmouth spot, all those are black bass. They're Micropterus species. All of those were only native east of the Rocky Mountains. So any bass west of the Rocky Mountains is a stocked fish. That's a fish that was stocked either by U.S. Fish and Wildlife or the state agency. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, beginning in about 1890, started transporting black bass across the country, trying to introduce them into different areas. They were introducing at the time northern or largemouth bass from that were captured in New York, raised in Virginia area, and then transported via actually train car across the U.S. And then as we kind of evolved the system, now we have hatcheries in every state. Of course, California, Southern California, specifically San Diego, is famous for the introduction of Florida bass in 1950 and 1960, and then of course the boom of Florida bass that created Dottie in the early 2000s. Those are all introduced fish. Well, that spotted bass did the exact same thing. It was brought from Alabama, put into reservoirs, grew to an amazing size, feeding on trout, some sort of salmon species. And then, unfortunately, we find out that's an Alabama bass. Now, the hard part is Alabama bass in general, they go through a process when they're introduced. The process begins with them being a small number of fish, and they thrive and they grow to a fairly large size quickly. But if you go far enough back into the bass history, like I'm talking several million years, we find that true spotted bass, like your Kentucky spots, largemouth bass, and smallmouth bass all evolved in areas where they overlapped. And what that meant was that smallmouth bass, largemouth bass, and spotted bass had slight competition when it came to reproduction. So they changed reproductive patterns so that they could spawn efficiently with themselves and not hybridize often. Alabama bass never had that competition. They were locked in the Coosa River basically by themselves. And so they evolved a prolonged spawning season. And instead of being a spawning general or a spawning specialist where they preferred certain types of substrate or habitat, they became spawning generalist. And that means that they can basically hybridize with any of those other species. And so when they're introduced outside of their native range, what ends up happening is those first individuals, they grow to a great size, good fish, but then they begin hybridizing. And when they hybridize with smallmouth spotted bass, they rapidly remove those fish from the population because they have a stronger genetic. Whenever they hybridize with largemouth bass, we still maintain a small largemouth bass population, but those fish become locked in like the upper reaches of creeks and tributaries, and the Alabama bass take over the entire main lake. And then over a long enough time, about 20 years, what ends up happening is Alabama bass begin to stunt. They just reach the limit of all the resources in the water body, and they have such great reproduction that they produce too many offspring and they stunt. And I'm talking about fisheries like Lake Norman. When you think of Lake Norman in North Carolina, Alabama bass were introduced about 30 years ago. They spread throughout the reservoir. Nobody really saw it. They didn't understand it at the time. Now there's no smallmouth bass. If you catch a largemouth, it's a pretty good one, but they're rare.
Yeah.
And instead, you catch 12-inch skinny spotted bass. Those are truly Alabama bass.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, because I know
go ahead, guys.
I know, like, because I was talking to Caleb, in which he caught on Parksville Lake. I don't know if you know about Parksville Lake.
Okay.
But it's off of the Coe River system. That, but he caught what was possibly be the state record spotted bass, and he was saying that they went and done like the DNA stuff on it, and the question on it is, was it really a true pure-blooded spot, or was it some kind of hybrid off of something else with it?
Yeah. I would, at this point, when somebody says we just caught a state record spotted bass, I immediately think that's an Alabama bass or an Alabama bass hybrid.
Yeah.
It's just, unfortunately, it's kind of the system we live in. Like, you take Lake Norman, you ask, how did the fish get to from Alabama to California? That one is pretty well documented. The fish that came from Alabama to Lake Norman, that was a tournament director that put them into a tank and hauled them to Norman.
Really?
Like,
yeah, because I know on Chickamauga, like at every public boat ramp, it says do not put any kind of like Alabama bass. That's the number one thing that's in bold. Do not put Alabama bass in the fishery.
Yep. States of Tennessee, Arkansas, Kentucky, Virginia, like, that's a big issue, because if Alabama bass get in those fisheries, you have no more smallmouth. Your largemouth will crash. In 20 years' time, when we're talking about what are our kids going to catch, our kids are going to catch 12-inch spotted bass, and they're going to be Alabamas. If anglers move them, that's what's going to happen.
Right. Because I know, like, on Chickamauga primarily, like when Bass put them like number 3 in the nation for best bass lake, we see more out of state tags at the boat ramps the past 15 years or so. And like when the USA Bass Club comes to Chickamauga every year, they will have trucks that will have tanks on the back of them. So every fish that they catch, it's like 6+ pounds. They're taking those fish and taking them back up to Ohio. And And
I
so,
don't
is that an issue?
wait. I don't know if this is factual or not, but that it's not illegal to do.
Okay.
To transport fish like that from a public body of water would require a permit, and we do have legislation that does not allow the transport of any black bass species across state lines without having a license. So
Yeah.
if a tournament organization is currently doing that, they're breaking a federal law.
Yeah, because I know, like, for the past 3-4 years that because you know how, like, you'll know when a big tournament's coming in,
Yeah.
and you kind of plan your fishing around. All right, well, we need to kind of go and do some back creeks or back in the slough
Right.
fishing because these people are going to be pounding. And Chickamauga, you got to go on and get your tag to be able to go stand in line waiting to hit the ledges. And so, but every time they come in, I've seen them with trucks that have tanks on the back of them and seen them put like 5 to
Now,
6 pound bass.
are they not just transporting those fish to a different boat ramp for release?
Mm-mm. I asked them what are they doing, and they said that they're taking them back to Ohio.
No.
So,
Okay. Well, that needs to
but
be
I didn't
investigated.
know that it was illegal. I mean, that's a good thing to have you on because I mean I didn't know that was the
Yeah. Well,
case.
I'll have both Tennessee and Ohio in the room next week, and we'll have a conversation.
Yeah.
Because
So,
you can't do that.
and another thing, you was talking about what was it? That pro lake management.
Yeah.
And you brought up like let's just say a farm pond
Right.
that's let's just say an acre pond.
Okay.
So to grow the biggest bass that you're trying to grow, just a trophy bass pond lake for yourself or whatever, what is the main forage that needs to be there? Like, do you need to have more bluegill than you do shiners? I mean, because I know, like right now, I mean, the bass here are eating on bluegill and then like 6 to 8 inch gizzard shad.
Yep.
So,
Okay.
what would be if you're trying to?
Yeah. So let's talk brand new pond first, and we'll kind of work into management long term. Brand new pond, you're going to start with a minnow called a fathead minnow. A fathead minnow has a high reproductive potential to where they're going to spawn 2 to 3 times a month, depending on where you're at in the country. You may get 6 to 8 reproductions before it gets too hot for them, and then they may start spawning in the fall. The fathead minnow is an extremely slow swimming minnow, so they're only in the pond really for the first 2 years for the juvenile bass to grow to an adult size. Once they quit eating fatheads or they kind of eradicate all the fatheads, then they'll transition to bluegill. So as bass grow, of course, their mouth gate gets bigger and then the size of food they can eat gets bigger. But sunfish becomes the predominant part of their diet.
Right.
Bluegill will reproduce every 28 days as long as water temperatures between 65 and 85. So here in Texas, we can get 6 or 8 reproductions a year out of bluegill.
So they spawn that many times? Long
Yes,
as that
sir,
water.
yeah.
Oh wow.
That's
Yeah,
crazy.
and so you'll see them stop in August for a while, then they'll come back to beds in September, October when water cools down. But you get multiple reproductions out of a pure bluegill sunfish, and they mature at 3 inches in length. So they start spawning pretty young. They grow pretty quick to where if you're in a pond, if you're feeding them fish food, I mean you can grow them to 3 inches in a couple months. And of course, as they grow in size, their size of eggs increase. This is general with all fish. Size of eggs increase, in number of eggs can increase. So they can have better, hardier offspring as they get bigger. On bluegill, the big ones you see are mainly males. So they are better apt at protecting the nest, especially from nest predators. When you're building a pond for bass, you start with the fathead minnows. You also stock bluegill. The general rule for recreational pond would be 10 bluegill for every bass you plan to stock. That's universal. Now, if you're doing something where you're actually trying to grow a trophy-sized fish, a fish that's going to exceed, let's say, 12 to 13 pounds, then you're going to stock bluegill more at a ratio of about 40 bluegill to every bass you plan on stocking. We like to stock those bluegill 6 months to a year before you're going to put bass in, so that you can buy less, they can reproduce more without having anything predation on them, and so you can get a larger number of fish. Every pond in the country also uses red ear sunfish. Red ear sunfish, you guys may call them shell crackers. Those actually eat snails, and snails are where majority of aquatic parasites come from. So we use the red ear so that our fish don't have parasites or have as few as possible. Those are the three primary fish that you build your fishery out of. Then, depending on where you are in the country, you may stock at year 2 or 3 something to diversify the food chain. My preference is threadfin shad because I live in the southern part of the U.S., and threadfin are planktivores that have a long, protracted spawning window, 6 to 8 weeks, where they're spawning almost every single morning. They have no maternal care. They just project eggs in the water column across usually vegetated habitat, sometimes rock habitat, and then they move on. What that does is that means that they have a high reproductive potential. They just have a lot of eggs and a good size. Some people will use gizzard shad, as you mentioned. Gizzard shad are great as long as they're being contained by trophy bass. Gizzard shad can outgrow the food chain. They can get to a large size. I've seen gizzard shad between 18 and 20 inches. When they get that big, they actually start to kind of be a detriment to the fishery a little bit. Some people in the U.S. can use tilapia, depending on which state they're in. Tilapia is it's an exotic species, but it's a species that has high reproductive potential, like the bluegill. They actually are what we call mouth brooders, and so that means that the female picks the eggs up and holds them in their mouths instead of laying them in a nest. So she gets almost 100% success on every time she's reproducing. And they're spawning every 28 days. So they get a lot of fish really quickly. Now, long term, when we're talking about long term managing the fishery, harvest of the bass is the most important part. It takes for every fish, it has to eat its body weight times 5 every year to maintain. So if we have a 1-pound fish, it has to eat 5 pounds to maintain 1 pound the next year. If it's going to grow to be a 2-pound fish, then it actually has to eat its body weight times 5 plus an additional 10 pounds within that year. And whenever we're talking about trophy fisheries, we're going to average between right around 1.5 pounds of growth a year. So you got to think, okay, that first year, not so hard. You got to eat 5 pounds plus an additional 10 pounds. We can do that. As we start moving those fish up, and let's say we have a 5-pound fish, a 5-pound fish needs 5 pounds times 5, so 25 plus an additional 10. That's 35 pounds it has to eat this year. Now, if it's eating bluegill, 3-inch bluegill run about 30 fish to the pound. So we do that math in kind of reverse, and we say, okay, if we need 5 pounds at 30 fish, that's 150 bluegill that you have to eat to maintain your body weight.
Right.
You need an additional 300 bluegill to gain that pound. And so the equation in ponds just becomes, how do I have enough forage to maintain which I have and push them ahead to whatever my goal is? And the end result of that becomes you have to harvest fish. Now, if money's no object, you put bass in that aren't going to spawn. So you put all females. Because I don't know if the entire audience knows, for largemouth, females are the only fish that are going to exceed 6 pounds on average. So we could do all females. We can guarantee that they're not going to reproduce, so we're not going to have constant need for harvest, and we're only growing fish that are going to exceed 6 pounds. That's a better bet, but those are more expensive because they have to be sexed at a small size. Those are just more expensive fish.
Right. So how early can they sex the bass?
Well, if you want to be 100%, you got to wait till they can actually produce eggs. So that's around 10 inches.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So, what other species of fish has a continuous spawn other than bluegill and what?
Well, there's not many. The fathead minnow's one, but they swim so slow they're not going to last. Most of your black bass species will spawn in windows. We think of the spawn as like a special weekend in March, and it's not. The spawn begins in February sometime. You've got your biggest fish that are going to come up early. A single female is going to go to a nest. She's going to drop approximately 25% of her eggs. She's going to come off that nest. She's going to wait 2 weeks. She's going to come back to another nest, drop 25% of her eggs. She's going to do that 3 or 4 times. They're going to.
I didn't know that.
They're going to spread their reproductive effort over a season rather than at one time, mainly because if they reproduce and something happens to that individual nest, then they've lost the ability to put their genetics into the pool. And it's just something that's ingrained in their brains. They have no logical thought to this. That's just what they do.
Right. Well, see, because I had a friend of mine, we were talking about like catching spawning bass.
Right.
And he didn't go into, but I think this is probably where he was kind of thinking about, because he said that like every female, you catch a spawn bass or a bass on bed, he said a female is going to make sure that it has a successful spawn. So if you catch it, and like let's say for instance, you catch it and you have to go up to Dayton on Chickamauga, that somewhere in the transition of coming back, getting released back into the water, it's going to have a successful spawn somewhere in that. So where he was going was he doesn't have an issue with catching a spawning bass because he believed that that bass was going to have a successful bass, and which it makes sense now if they're only dropping 20-25%. Then
now I got a question. So how much does it put a lot of stress on a female? Like if she's been caught and then when they're going to weigh in, does that affect the eggs as well?
Yeah, because anytime a fish is stressed, she's going to produce cortisol, and cortisol is going to get into the eggs. And one thing that is not tracked, it's hard to track individuals, right? And say what happened to this specific female, and then where did she go and what did she do afterwards. So just go with me on the theoretic side of this. She gets stressed. Right. She could go produce those eggs. Those eggs may or may not be viable. Or she could just absorb those eggs. Now, the reason that what you're saying is theoretically correct is because not all eggs are at the same ripeness at the same time. So they're in development over a long window. There is a lot of research whenever we talk about what happens to an individual nest, and by far, the best strategy if you want successful reproduction is to catch that fish and within 2 minutes have it released back into the water. Then it won't abandon that specific nest. If it goes beyond 2 minutes, they're going to abandon that nest. What happens weeks later, that's up for debate.
Right. Now, we do have some questions that I do want to kind of get to. My dad put on here, what was the cause of the catfish die-off that we had on Chickamauga 2 years ago? Which we had, it was like 3, 4, it was all like the same size, 3-4 pound catfish, that there was hundreds of them that just all throughout Chickamauga was just turned up floating on within
what time of year was it?
It was early summer, late spring, early summer.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it, so I'm probably not the appropriate one to ask. on this. I mean, I could theorize all day long. I asked what time of year because there are some viruses that are specifically associated with catfish in the winter, but it doesn't sound like that would be that. That spring, early summer, that is catfish spawning season. So you do have those fish. Catfish are cavity type spawners, so they're going to be fighting each other often. It's also going to be at a high stress time of year. There could be so many environmental factors that it would be impossible for me to give you something that I felt like was comfortable not knowing the situation.
Right. So all I know is that for about 2 weeks, Chickamauga stunk.
Yeah.
It just smelled like rotten fish. So,
I hear you.
Another one, it says transplanting bass from state to state. While to know that was going on, thanks for the information. My question is for the young man in the state of Florida. The University of Florida was once working on a program called Super Bass, whether they are trying to genetically enhance the growth of largemouth to pass bigger. Do you know if they are still working on that program?
Okay. Yeah, I've never heard of super bass specifically. You have one geneticist that was formerly an employee of Florida. That his name's Josh Sackmar. He runs the Red Hills Fish Hatchery in southern Georgia now, but lives in Florida. And they are working on doing a size selection model with genetic markers that all fish over a certain size have. So that, let's say 12 pounds, every fish over 12 pounds has these markers, and they're looking at that to become a prediction on if offspring can grow the same as their parents. That's similar to what Texas Parks and Wildlife is doing with the Share Lunker program. The state of Florida specifically has a couple of really interesting trophy bass projects. One of them involves stocking rainbow trout to try to exceed the natural growth. They've done some really good research into their native forage and looking at the amount of protein and that each forage item would have, and how that would impact the growth of bass. And then the state of Florida is really particular about in their hatchery program where their brood fish come from, because they want to isolate. They've actually divided the state into like these little quadrants. They want to isolate brood fish so that they go back into the similar reservoirs or water bodies throughout the state, so that they're not mixing Florida genetic from north to south. So I don't think that they're doing any really selective genetic breeding, but not that the state of Florida needs to do that. The state of Florida, they're kind of unique because they're home of Florida bass, which, of course, if you see a fish that exceeds 15 pounds in the U.S., it is most likely a Florida bass, or definitely a Florida largemouth cross.
Right.
If it's over 15 pounds, I would pretty much say it has Florida genetic in it. You see a fish that is over 20 pounds, there hasn't been a modern day, so let's say 1980 to today, a modern day fish over 20 pounds that wasn't a pure Florida bass.
Really?
Now, is there a Florida bass in Texas? Have you seen a lot of Florida bass in Texas?
Yeah, all the fish that are produced by Texas Parks and Wildlife currently are Florida bass. Previously, they were producing about 4.5 to 5 million fish a year that were Floridas. Of course, on the private sector side, we use native or largemouth bass. We use what's called the F1 cross, which would be a native or largemouth bass with a Florida bass, and then we use pure Florida, depending on the client's goals. Whenever I do genetic mapping of different ponds and things like that for clients, I see kind of everything from across the board, whether it's pure largemouth bass that would be native to our creeks, all the way up to pure Florida bass that would be something similar to what Texas Parks and Wildlife stocks.
Right. Now, what kind of bass are? I think is it Lake Fort that right there that borders Texas and Mexico? Is that right?
No, that's Amistad.
Okay. Now,
Yep.
because they some big bass in there in that lake.
Yep. Yeah, that would be a pure Florida as well. So kind of how the Share Lunker program works is the female has to be a pure Florida, and they're crossed with offspring that are also from Sherlunker parents and pure Floridas. So everything that the state is producing is a Florida. Now, Amistad was, it's one of those unique fisheries where tilapia, they live year round because it is so close to Mexico and on the border. It has a high harvest rate. On the Mexico side, they still harvest bass for food, so there's still a lot of bass coming out of it, and it fluctuates in elevation, which means you have boom and bust cycles. Whenever you have high water, you get flooded terrestrial vegetation, you get a high recruitment or number of bass that are surviving, and then when you have low water, there's less habitat, but the forage becomes more available for the bass. So the bass that can survive that, they come out of it a better size. You see the same thing with the reservoir OHIV in the center of Texas. It's boom or bust. We'll have 10 years of really great fishing, followed by 10 years of just, it's pretty rough and pretty tough to catch them.
Yeah, and that's one thing, like, I got to give it to Texas wildlife and what y'all do with Texas, because they manage their fisheries a whole lot better, and which I was able to go and do media work and stuff for the Classic, and going down there and seeing the fisheries and stuff, they are in a whole lot better shape than what we are here in Tennessee.
I would disagree. I would politely disagree.
Really?
I work with every state agency. Texas does a phenomenal job. Don't get me wrong. I'm on the Freshwater Fisheries Advisory Committee. I sit through the meetings. I offer input. They have a great program. They have the Sherlunker program, which is a select genetic, but they're stocking pure Florida bass. The state of Tennessee is stocking pure Florida bass. You guys have been doing that in Chickamauga for generations. The difference, in my opinion, is how our water is sourced. Predominantly, we have multiple river authorities and we have the Corps of Engineers. But predominantly, our water is not moved down a river the size of the Tennessee River. So we have smaller systems. So we're not moving flood water that's draining half the U.S. We're moving water that's draining several counties. And so we will have systems that are fairly stable. We also, the state of Texas does take a slightly different stance on hydrilla as an agency. Texas Parks and Wildlife sees hydrilla as an invasive species that must be controlled unless other types of habitat aren't available, in which case it only needs to be controlled in places that prevent navigation or homeowners access to their docks. And so we create some pretty strict rules on where and how we control plants. The TVA system, you have true cargo going down the system. And so there's a commercial value to that water. And that water has to be moved continuously and it drains a much bigger area. So the system, it's not for lack of management by TWRA. It is just how the systems are designed. They're designed with fishing at the very bottom of the list. It's a commercial system first. And because of that, they don't allow for certain types of habitat to grow because they have to be able to move that water and move those vessels.
Right. That might be the question for the spraying of TVA spraying.
Because like every year, like we have the hydrilla and stuff like that and the grass growing. TVA will contract out. Well, here the past 2 years they've contracted out. They don't spray it anymore. They've contracted it out. And they are going, I mean, it's making the main river channel pretty much bald. Besides like that, it's a certain kind of grass that it is, that it does not, the grass, if it will not kill that grass. And if the hydrilla is growing in that grass, that hydrilla will stay in that grass. But pretty much other than that, the whole river channel gets bald. And but then we have the back of the sluice, so where property owners, let's say there's 6 houses that's in the back of the slough, but there's grass back there, and then they'll go and they'll privately contract somebody to come out there and
Or do it themselves.
and do it themselves. Right.
Yeah,
So go ahead.
That's going to be, I mean, of course, this is the typical conflict that we have with public bodies of water. We have homeowners, and they have a deed that is somewhere. Sometimes it stops at the shoreline. Sometimes it continues on to the center of the river channel. You have whatever your authority is, your actual water authority. In some water authorities, they use different definitions of exotic species. Let's just take Corps of Engineers, because that's an easy one. Corps of Engineers have 418 reservoirs throughout the U.S. The Corps of Engineers are in like 29 states. They have centralized offices. They all have the same document that says you must eradicate exotic species, plants that enter into the system. Hydrilla would be on that list.
Right.
So now you take a Corps of Engineer office, and they have to decide, how literal do we want to take this? In some offices, they take eradication to mean let's get rid of all of the plant. And then other offices say, well, it's actual eradicate the exotic species if it's preventing navigation. And so we're just going to do main channel, or we're just going to do certain areas.
Right.
So,
which I understand that with it being on the main channel. I mean, because pretty much the whole river system was made for ships and barges and stuff like that to be able to transport goods wherever, up and down the river. And I understand that. But
yes, I think this is my point, guys, is if we take the TWRA, who actually manages the fish, and we say, you guys aren't doing enough because there's no grass, it's not even their jurisdiction. They're not the authority on that. They could be arguing the exact same thing as the anglers are, and you're not giving them the credit of that. So this is where we get, I see this across the country. I speak to angler groups all the time, and I say, start by finding your local biologist and having those conversations. Your local biologist at Chickamauga is Joey Root. Joey is a phenomenal young biologist who is excited about Chickamauga. It's his dream to be the manager of Chickamauga.
Joey Root?
Root, R-O-O-T. Yeah, okay. And Joey is phenomenal. No, he's phenomenal. I've done several habitat projects with him. He'll put you on the electrofishing boat. He'll take you out. He'll show you.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah, my point is a guy like that's devoted his entire career. It's young in his career, but he's devoted his entire career to, I want to be the manager of Chickamauga, is fighting the same battles that you're talking about. And often I tell angler groups, start with finding your biologist. When you find your biologist, don't assume that they're making the bad decision, because if you start the conversation with, why aren't you doing a better job? Like you've killed that conversation. Start with understanding, like, how is hydrilla even controlled? Like, who's making the decision?
Right.
How can we help?
Well, see, and I think that you hit the nail on the head, because a lot of us anglers, we know our TWRA or TVA and stuff like that. You're not pinpointing to know. I mean, TWRA's hands may be handcuffed on it. They don't have it. And so, which we don't think about. All we think about is, they're spraying again, and and it's killing all the grass. All the grass is gone. The bait fish is killing that, and and that was one reason why I really wanted to have you come on, because, and what you said, like, that's one of your biggest questions and stuff that you get.
Yep.
And that makes perfect sense. I mean, they may not have jurisdiction on what happens right there.
Oh, I've heard of a million different conflicts to where the fisheries biologist is literally saying, we need the habitat, and the local, whoever it is in the local office is saying, I agree with you. It's up in Washington. that this decision is being made. Not for TBA, but for other groups. I can't control this one. I mean, it's just like all of us. Everybody's got a boss somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, we got a question that says, can you put hydrilla/stripers in a personal lake or pond?
Yeah, so he's talking about hybrid striped bass. Of course, that's the cross between a striped bass and a white bass, and they are sterile. We do stock them in private ponds across the country. Hybrid striped bass are excellent at consuming small forage items. They can be feed trained. You can grow them to a really great size. They will consume a lot of your shad. They'll consume a lot of your bluegill. So whenever you decide to make that happen, you either have to decide to put a small number of fish in, or you have to say, I'm going to have a hybrid striped bass fishery, and I'm not concerned with growing largemouth specifically.
Right.
Yep.
So I know, because I'm originally from Nashville area.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've got a cousin that he loves to do some hybrid fishing.
Okay.
And within he says within the past 6 to 8 years, he has noticed the population of the hybrid just dwindling.
Yep.
And the size of them is also getting smaller as well. But he thinks that it's more or less because the the Asian population, he says, we see them all the time on the banks, and everything they catch goes into a bucket or into a cooler, and they're taking them home. Would that really hinder the amount of the population of a fish species? I mean,
Yep.
I know Nickajack, TWRA last year, I was talking to, what's the guy's name? I think it was Josh, the guy's name Josh, that they were shocking up fish on Nickajack, and they said that Nickajack had more fish per square mile than any other lake on the TVA. And but to me, just to have people out bank fishing, catching, even if they kept everything that they caught, it's hard to believe that they're putting a dent that big into a population.
Okay, so let's unpack that. So first, hybrid striped bass are not a natural fish. They cannot naturally be produced in the fishery. So they are what we call a put and take species, as in you make an order, I'm going to put X number of fish in, I'm going to put them in the system. They have basically a life expectancy between 7 and 10 years. But your agency knows how many fish they're putting in, and it's basically done almost on an order system. Think about if the three of us were in charge of all of Alabama, and I've got the southern part, you've got the middle part, you've got the north part, and we each want 10,000 hybrid stripers for our reservoirs, and they say, well, guys, we only have 20,000 fish. Where do you want them? They're gonna kind of split them among us, and then we have to decide where they're going to go. So it's a production number, but then however many are put out is what's put out. We use various sampling methods, including electrofishing, to estimate first what is the recruit, and this is non-natural recruitment. This is what survives being stocked into adulthood. And then we use krill surveys. And krill surveys are those interviews that you get at the boat ramp or on the boat where the biologist comes up to you and asks you, how many fish did you catch? What species are you trying to catch? We use those two data points to determine what percentage of fish are caught and released versus caught and kept. And then those numbers, the number we stock, the number that make it to adult size, and the number that are harvested go together to give us an idea of what the harvest regulation should be. What size class can you harvest, and how many can each individual take? We don't want, hybrid stripers are the one species that we're just trying to maintain a number that's a catchable number. So whenever they ask you the question during your krill survey of what was your enjoyment, they may ask it several different ways, but basically, did you enjoy your time? Do you feel like you caught enough fish? If the answer to that is no enough times, they stock more fish. If the answer to that is yes, then they say we're going to maintain this number, or we can take a few off.
Yeah. So, a couple other questions that I've got. Kayak or USA Kayak Fishing Magazine said, do you think that, or do you feel CPR is the format of all tournaments should go to? Which he had that same question, which is, if you don't know, is what catch, photo, release.
Yeah. Whether it's
so do you think that all tournaments?
Whether it's catch, photo, release, catch, weigh and release, catch, measure and release, I don't care. That's what all tournaments should go to. The reason is you want to know who is the best angler today on the water. Our competition starts whatever it is, 5 o'clock tonight, and we're going to run till 9. We want to know who's the best today. I don't care if we decide we're going to take our best 3 fish, our best 5 fish, our biggest fish, who can catch the most fish. I don't care how we do it. We're trying to figure out who the best angler is today. Why then did we add another layer to the sport, which is who can take care of their best fish for the day?
Yeah.
And now we had to bring them to the weigh. And we did that because we don't trust each other. Mm-hmm. That's what it boils down to. We wanted the
but proof. Technology now is there to where we can do all this.
Correct.
And so, just like what you said, we could catch, weigh, get a photo within that 2-minute time frame, and get that fish right back into it.
And what that prevents is what's called stockpiling. And there's an interesting thing that's happening in Alabama right now that you guys should pay attention to on the Coosa River. The Alabama DNR partnered with Auburn University to look at the impact of tournament fishing on the Coosa River, and specifically on Neely Henry. And what the researchers found was that anglers fishing in tournaments were catching faster growing, younger, larger fish than the agency was catching with their sampling methods. So let's say I'm in the agency and I go out and I catch 18-inch fish. Well, on average, my 18-inch fish would be slightly underweight. They would be a year or 2 years older than the fish that the anglers are bringing in. And then they also showed the mortality rate. And that mortality rate can range between 40 and 70% from a weigh-in tournament.
Right.
But that means that our tournament anglers, unfortunately, are pulling out the best fish of the population. And they have the higher mortality, which leaves us with the slower growing fish.
And see, that's things that we don't even think about. Right.
Yeah. So then Alabama DNR, their initial reaction was to take Neely Henry and the rest of the Coosa River and apply a slot limit and make it more like Lake Fork, to where you could bring 5 fish to a weigh-in, but only 4 of those fish could be below, or 4 of those fish had to be below 16 inches, and then only 1 fish could be above 20 inches, to try to reduce the number of fish that are those faster growing fish that are going to go through that mortality. And if we don't electively move towards a catch, weigh, release format, our agencies are going to force it on us, because in most situations, early spring, we're just having a quick tournament, we don't have big mortality, but there are certain events that do have big mortality. Yeah. And the unfortunate truth is you're culling fish throughout the day so that you can bring me your 5 best, and those are the ones that are going to be subject to that mortality.
So is that like the let's just say, for instance, G juice, does that really help out with fish care, or is that just really some kind of product that is
the hard part about all live well conditioners or water conditioners is they don't have a label that says what's in them. So technically, any fish in a public body of water is in the food system. Anybody else could capture that fish, take it home and eat it tonight, feed it to their kids, which means it's under FDA regulation. So whenever that fish is in your possession, the FDA says that you can only do 3 things. You can add ice salt or dissolved oxygen to that container that has that fish. Anything outside of those three things is not approved by the FDA for use. So my technical answer is I can't tell you if G-juice is good or bad, but I also can't tell you to use it because it's not FDA approved. If G-juice had the ingredients on the bottle, then I could read those ingredients and say, guys, this is salt, great to use. It has something else in it. FDA can approve that or not approve that. I could tell you that. But until they do, you're not going to find a biologist that's going to say, yeah, you should use that.
So is the FDA not or the companies that's making this stuff not regulated or to put what stuff on there?
It's a water conditioner. So technically, they're just getting around it by you're not treating the fish, you're treating the water.
So it's like they just found a loophole is what it is. And
Well, it's FDA approval is very expensive and it takes a long time, and they would have to disclose everything that's in there, which means a competitor could then put those same things in a bottle and it would immediately be FDA approved and they wouldn't have to pay for it. So there's a competition element too that makes it tough.
I get that. That's understandable. But I never did think about it as whatever fish that we catch, and if we and I don't mean to call out G-juice, that was just the first one.
No, absolutely. It's the most well-known brand because they have done a good job.
Right. But to realize we're only going to have it fish in the boat for minimum amount of time, and then it's going back in the water, but that fish has got to be able to be consumed if somebody else caught it a day later or whatever.
This is what the weigh-in kind of creates a liability on all of us because it doesn't determine who is the best angler. It literally determines who's the best at fish care.
Yeah. And that's true because especially where you live in Texas and in Florida, we see it in the middle of summer to where our water temps are pushing 90s, mid 90s, and it's hard to keep fish in a live well wet.
Right.
When the water temp's so hot and the outside temp is hitting 100, and it is very hard. Let's see. Another thing is, Jerry or Hunter says, have you done any studies with the product called Fish Lung?
Yeah. Those are products that would. Well, I don't know what Fish Lung is, to be honest with you. I'm guessing it's a product that would be like an oxygenator for a live well. Maybe you can ask Jerry. Mm-hmm. If it is, then an oxygenator for a live well is one of those things that. Let's just go back to pro lake management. We professionally haul fish. When we professionally haul fish, what we do is we put salt in the water. We put salt to raise the ability for the fish to filter that salt through their gill, and then allows them to basically secrete slime out of their bodies. And that's a protective layer on them. So it de-stresses the fish, but it also protects the external parts of the fish.
So is that just like sea salt?
Yeah. It's any table salt, deionized salt. You're good. So you put salt in the water. The second thing we do is we put dissolved oxygen, and we run our dissolved oxygen at about 10 parts per million, or milligrams per liter. That's the hard part about like a system like what I assume Aqualung is, or whatever we called it just a second ago. We partner with a company called Piranha O2 that makes a really good oxygen generator for Major League Fishing. Bassmaster partners with them as well. But we read how many milligrams per liter of oxygen are in the water. If I asked you, as just a normal angler, what was your oxygen in your live well? Most people would not even know, like, how do I assess that?
How do you get it? Right.
Yeah.
What is good? What is bad? That's the hard part about these things, because there is a window. If you get below 5 milligrams per liter, the fish are very stressed. You get below 4, they start to die. You get above saturation, and you start having 20 20 milligrams per liter, all of a sudden you're burning gill filaments. Whenever you start burning gill filaments, then that prohibits them from getting oxygen out of the water, and that could long term create a mortality issue. So there's like a window, somewhere between 8 and 14 milligrams per liter that you really want that oxygen to be.
Yeah. See, because oh shoot, we've been doing this podcast even for 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
We've had so many. Each week we have a special guest on, and we had the owner. I can't think of what his name is. That he has the product. Please release me.
Okay.
And he was telling us like putting peroxide in the water as well will help oxygenate the water as well. Is that something that y'all do?
Yep. So that is not something we do, but it is something that does kind of work. What peroxide does is it breaks apart through a chemical process, breaks apart the plankton, the algae in the water, and that releases oxygen. It also generates heat, so it's going to warm the water up slightly. But we're talking about increasing the oxygen for a very short duration. So an emergency situation might be worth doing. It's just not a fish care. It's not something you're going to fish care and you're going to do all day. Yeah. I mean, I tell anglers it's simple. We do have weigh-ins, so we need to keep our fish alive. It's simple steps. First thing, before you leave the house, make sure both your recirculating and your intake pumps are working. When you get on the water, read the temperature that's on the depth finder, whatever it is. You can add ice periodically throughout the day, but you never want that live well temperature to drop below 5 degrees below whatever that temperature was when you first hit the water. So if you go beyond 5 degrees and you get towards 10, you're not going to see an issue. You start going 10 to 20 degrees beyond what that surface temperature is, and your fish are going to go into thermal shock. And that could lead to mortality long term as well. So 5 degrees is very safe. You can catch a fish, put it into that live well, and not have to transition it, which means you have to be able to either recirculate that live well the entire time, or you got to have additional ice so that you can periodically intake new water that's oxygen rich, but then cool it back down that same 5 degrees. So it takes effort, but if you make that effort, you're going to have better fish.
So, Jerry or Hunter, I don't know which one it is. They both will get on here on this one. So if we took a Florida strand bass and a natural bass to your water and each are 5 years old, what would be the size difference?
Perfect question. We're gonna make 3 assumptions. First assumption is that the forage is available at all size classes. So we're going to talk about maximum growth. We're also going to make the second assumption is that we are putting those fish in at the exact same size to start with. So they have equal opportunity for forage and they're the same size. And the third assumption is that no other fish are being introduced or taken out. So we've got a stagnant population. It rarely happens, but we try to do this in science. What's going to happen is the largemouth bass, the first year growth is going to be better than the Florida bass. It'll have a larger size. It can grow, 2.5, 3 pounds that first year if forage is optimal. The Florida bass is going to be slightly slower, so it's going to grow maybe 2.5 pounds. Somewhere in the middle of year 2, in the middle of year 3, there's going to be a transition where the Florida starts growing at a faster rate. And once that happens, then you're gonna see at 5 years old. Let's say we're in Texas at 5 years old, the Florida bass will be 8 to 10 pounds, let's say. And the northern bass is going to fall shorter and it'll be 6 to 8 pounds. At 10 years old, that Florida bass can exceed 14, 15 pounds. That northern bass is going to stop around 12. So it's really, if you get towards the latter part of the life, that it makes more of a difference.
Right. So here's when Hunter or Jerry was talking about the fish lung, and it says that it's a system that changes your oxygen from 10 parts per million to like 20 parts per million using micro bubbles. So when y'all stock Florida strand bass, are y'all stocking or are they stocking all females, or are they stocking males and female
They're
Florida
stocking
strand?
male and female. You're talking about state agencies, like, if Tennessee is going to stock Chickamauga, if Texas is going to stock anything in the state, they're going to stock a mixed sex population. It's once again very hard to identify sex on fish, especially early life stages. And most of the fish that are being stocked in our public water bodies are, 1.5 to 3 inches, somewhere in that size. And that's just because they can be grown on phytoplankton and zooplankton rather than consume actual fish. Well, as soon as a bass hits 3 inches, then it switches to primarily eating fish. And so you have to then stock fish for it to eat, or it's going to eat each other. And so you start losing your yield out of the population really quickly.
So why, like, when we've had Caleb on, and Caleb was talking about like when they stock Florida bass in Chickamauga, for instance, the biggest bass that we've seen and that he was talking about are those F1 bass. That is Florida strand and what is it, North American bass, or what I think that's what it is.
Largemouth. Yep, largemouth bass, right? Yeah,
Right.
So the F1 is just the first generation cross between a Florida and a largemouth bass. And technically, they should have what we would call hybrid vigor, or the ability to take traits from both parent and outgrow either. That doesn't always happen. That's not universally known, because there is some still debate if they are truly hybrids. I would probably fall under the category that they're not separate species because they freely hybridize themselves. So you don't universally see that. There is no predictable reason why those fish would outgrow native fish either. So we had, whenever I did the stipulations, I did those stipulations because if resources are available at the same rate, it takes the same pound of forage to gain the same amount of weight. They should grow at a similar rate. There's slight differences in genetics, of course, but it's not this big variable. Whenever we say things like, well, only the F1s get to a large size, well, who did the genetic work on that? Because you can't look at those fish and know they're F1s. They could be FX, which would be multiple generations down the road.
Right.
Or they could be pure Floridas. It's hard. It's hard without taking true DNA of each one of those fish to determine that. We assume a lot of things whenever we see F1s being stocked. We assume at Chickamauga what's happening is the state stocks a pure Florida. That pure Florida has the option to spawn with a largemouth and create F1s. It also has the option to stock with an F1 or FX and create more FXs, or it has the option to spawn with a Florida. So you're getting all three combinations pretty simultaneously.
Yeah, and which it kind of makes sense, like, because Caleb was telling me, and I call him the fish whisperer, and so pretty much anything he says about fish, if he could tell me that fish swim upside down, and I'd believe it. So
I love it.
But he was telling me that, like, kind of like what you were saying, like that the largemouth will grow. They kind of get like two kind of little growth spurts, because at first that largemouth will grow bigger, and then later on in life it gets that Florida strand. He says that's that F1 is where that's the fish that you want to be able to have in the lake at or whatever reservoir that you're fishing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's debatable. Whenever somebody calls me and says I want to grow a trophy fish, I'm stocking a pure Florida. So you're going to find 12 different fish guys that are going to have 15 different answers to this question. Caleb's not wrong. I assume I'm not wrong. it's all situational.
So what is the biggest fish that y'all have shocked up to date?
Shocked up is that, let's see, 14 pound fish is probably the biggest we've ever shocked up. Had a client 2 years ago catch a 16.7. I've had a client catch a 17.5. It's very hard to shock a big fish because, well, you guys know big fish don't get big by being dumb. They get big by taking the best parts of habitat, being aware of their surroundings. Whenever a boat moves in, putting electricity in the water, they're pretty quick to move. Also, whenever you electrofish a fish, it goes through a process called galvanotaxis. And that's your scientific word of the day, folks, galvanotaxis. And what that means is the fish gets shocked. I'm not spelling it. Its muscles contract. Yeah, so the fish gets shocked, its muscles contract, and we assume all fish float, but they don't. Majority of fish actually sink. And so those big fish, typically they sink. And you get one quick look at them and then they're gone. So it's pretty difficult to get one of the big ones.
Yeah. Now, I do want to ask you about the Asian carp. Because I know Kentucky Lake, I mean, it demolished Asian carp.
Right.
Or it demolished the lake because of the Asian carp. Because it used to be one of my favorite bass fishing lakes until the Asian carp came in.
Right.
So what is it about Asian carp? Because I know, like, we don't. I mean, you want to stop them as soon as possible because they're not typically from here, and so and then they grow so rapid and they demolish a lot of food source. Correct.
Yeah, so the Asian carp are actually 4 different species of carp, and unfortunately they're grouped together. So you have grass carp, black carp, silver carp, and bighead carp. And I'm amazed that I remembered that. I never talk about the subject, so I'm applauding myself right now. The ones you're most worried about are silver carp and bighead carp. All of those species escaped from fish farms in the 80s from the state of Arkansas. They moved through the system slowly, and we really didn't see the bighead and the silver carp becoming an issue until they kind of hit critical mass. And both of those species are pretty good generalists in what they can consume, but they filter plankton and phytoplankton and zooplankton from the water pretty easily. And all fish, they use phytoplankton and zooplankton as fry, as one of the first food sources. And so having a fish that is 20 inches that can filter that food out causes a great deal of competition. This is the same argument against zebra mussels. Zebra mussels filter plankton out and create water clarity. Now, the Asian carp, as a group, if we just think of the big heads and the silvers as the ones that are filtering, the grass carp consume vegetation, and then the black carp, they eat a lot of crustaceans. So the black carp are rarely an issue. The grass carp situationally can be an issue because they will modify habitat, but the silver and the big head carp, they're the ones that are going to crash your food chain. Then they're going to have this high reproductive potential. And unfortunately, we don't really have a predator that consumes a lot of carp. In certain systems, you have the alligator gar, which would consume carp. And in other systems, north, you have muskie, which would consume carp. But central U.S., you don't have many options on what's going to consume those Asian carp. So they're able to create a biomass that just takes the carrying capacity out of the lake. There's only a certain number of pounds per acre that any water body can support. And as we start dividing that between species, if we have one that's a good generalist, has high reproductive potential, can outgrow predation, has no top end predator, that one's going to win. And whenever it starts winning, then it takes the majority of the carrying capacity.
Yeah. Then we got Steven says Illinois has a bounty on black carp.
Yeah, I can imagine they do. I mean, there's some systems where you have native mussels. You have reasons that you probably want them out of the system.
Yeah. So here's one that says carp in the state of Florida and 2 lakes turned into carnivores after they eat all the vegetation. Have you witnessed that firsthand?
I've not witnessed that firsthand. I rarely catch a grass carp. I think that's probably what you're talking about, a grass carp on like a moving bait. It's been very rare in my experience.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, well, Stephen, we have had you on for almost an hour and a half, brother.
It don't seem like it.
And I can
always
keep on
happens.
going. And I just realized, looked at the clock. So,
No problem, guys. I'm gonna go outside and I'm gonna work on everybody's favorite thing, which is trailer lights. Because I got a 4 a.m.
Yeah.
I got a 4 a.m. departure and I've got a bad light. Anybody who wants to come to Texas and help me fix it, that's what we're gonna go do right now. But if you guys ever have time, you want me back on the show, please feel free. Grab these questions. Your audience has been great. These are great questions. I don't often get such good ones, so I really appreciate it. Appreciate y'all's time.
Yeah. Well, we do have one more question for you that we ask everybody that comes on. Pappy, you want to ask it?
So if you had one person that you could fish with, past or present, who and why?
Yep. Great question. I'm gonna go with Johnny Morris right now, and that's really the father of our kind of modern day fish conservation. And I think the two of us were in a boat, we were stuck together for 8 hours. That I would be able to I'd be able to make some things happen.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
So, guys, thank you again, Stephen. Man, we
had a blast.
We had a blast. We're definitely gonna have to get you back on here because my mind was just with you talking. I had 15 questions that I wanted to ask you, and I think I asked one.
I had a bunch too, and then I mean,
So, but we'll definitely have to get you back on. We'll get that scheduled. We had a blast, but guys, thank you for tuning in and asking these questions. It never ceases to amaze me what all y'all do for the podcast. We had a podcast that was unexpected here Thursday, and we had almost 3,800 people watching live. And so we want to thank y'all again. Next week, we have Larry with J Bros Lures coming on, a good buddy of ours. And so we're going to have him on talking some baits. But other than that, guys, we're going to get out of here. This fat boy is hungry, and I think I got some meatloaf waiting for me to eat. So, guys, I hope y'all have a blessed one, and we'll see you next week.
See you guys.